The term quirk means a particular behavioral habit or trait that makes someone stand out, which is why the term was applied to the superpowers of Boku no My Hero Hyperlipidemia. Though, interestingly enough, the superpower quirk can actually have an adverse effect on your own personality quirk, affecting you on a primal level and compelling someone to do something in a way that they can't help it. And if this trait is deemed unacceptable by society, then that person will be forced to suppress this trait until, eventually, it overflows to the surface, like the grotesque, gore-guzzling, guy-gutting, gallant-grimacing gang general, Himiko Toga, of the League of Villains. Himiko Toga is one of the major antagonists in the story of Hiroaka, being one of the most active members of the League of Villains as she appears in a multitude of arcs, be it the License Exam arc, the 8 Precepts, and of course, My Villain Academia. Her main motive to joining the League of Villains comes from her natural urge to use her quirk to become the people she loves, and this continues to be her driving force when she faces any form of adversity. But, even though her quirk and personality have somewhat left her isolated from regular society, Toga doesn't seem unhappy with her life, but she's more so relishing in the freedom that being a villain grants her. And as the story continued and Toga's history was revealed, it becomes very clear that Horikoshi always wanted to go beyond the typical yandere character that he had set Toga up as to begin with. But before we discuss that too deeply, let's first understand the meaning behind her name and design. Himiko Toga's name is a very interesting case in the whole of Hiroaka, being one of the first names released intentionally in katakana instead of kanji. This was originally done to keep her quirk a secret, as her name directly related to her quirk, and once her quirk was revealed, her kanji was too. With that in mind, the name Toga translates to migrate oneself, and her family name Himiko means to wear or put on someone else. So altogether, Himiko Toga means to migrate oneself by wearing someone else, which not only explains how she's been getting around in the underworld, but also gives you a clue into how her quirk works. This quirk being Transform or Henshin. Transform is a transformation quirk, which allows Toga to take the physical appearance of someone that she consumes the blood of. How this quirk works is, once active, Toga's body is covered with a perfect copy of that person that she's trying to impersonate, right down to the tiny details, even mimicking their voice perfectly, making her essentially an indistinguishable double from the real thing. This allows Toga to infiltrate and trick people and gather information, or gain advantage on attacking her prey. Though the one thing that she can't mimic out of the gate is the person's personality or secret knowledge that they know. Basically, she doesn't get their memories, and because of this, it's the only way that you can actually distinguish her from the original. Though there is one other downside to Transform, and that is, while it can mimic the clothes of the person that she's trying to copy, it can't change the clothes that Toga is currently wearing, meaning that she needs to remove them to complete her disguise, which means once the transformation timer runs out, Toga will essentially be nude. And speaking of the transformation timer, the time allowed for her transformation is based solely on the amount of blood that Toga has consumed from the specific source that she is copying. The rough equation is a cup's worth of blood is equal to at most a day's worth of transformation timer, which, going off the standard Japanese cup size of roughly 200 cubic centimeters or 6.8 ounces, Toga roughly needs 1/10 of the amount of blood in a person's body for a day's worth of energy. Toga can also ingest the blood of multiple people at one time, and if she does this, she can shapeshift between the two forms without having to return to her original form, and once she's used up all of her reserve, the disguise melts away. But there is one final, very important aspect of her quirk that was hidden for a good while until the My Villain Academia arc. This being that Toga can mimic the quirks of those that she is copying, though this requires her to know the quirk itself and how it works. She also has to mimic the required parts to do so, such as Uraraka's finger nodes, so that she can use her gravity quirk. Interestingly enough, a lot of people assume that Toga couldn't copy quirks right away, mostly because she never demonstrates the ability to do so, and once she blew her cover by not doing so, so one would assume that she couldn't. Though in that specific situation, she hadn't learned how Uraraka's quirk had worked, so she couldn't replicate it. And then, after that arc, she witnesses the quirk in action for the first time, and that sets up how she uses it in her next main arc after that. Also, all the moments moments where her quirk is explained, leading up to the reveal that she can use other people's quirk, it never directly mentions that she couldn't copy them. In fact, in the 8 Precepts arc, she was forced to give a detailed explanation of her quirk, and she never mentioned that drawback. And interestingly enough, Toga was always planned to have the ability to copy quirks. As we see in Horikoshi's prototype design for her, it speaks of her having this ability. And speaking of that prototype page, we also get to see how Toga's design has changed a bit since the planning stages of Hero Aka, but also more importantly, what core elements have remained the same. Starting first with her very vampiric and cat-like influences, such as her over-exaggerated canine teeth, much like that of vampire fangs that play into her blood-drinking quirk's nature. Oh yeah, also her bisexuality.
So that's why they call him Vamp. No, Vamp isn't for vampire, it's because he's bisexual.
Also, a lot of her physical traits relate to cats as well. Her teeth are very similar to the shape of cats, and her quirk, in part, seems inspired by the Bakeneko, which, for simplicity's sake, is a shape-shifting cat creature that turns into a woman to lure others in to eat them, with one key feature of the Bakeneko being their eyes, which Toga has very distinct cat-like irises. But one of the coolest details about Toga's design is her hair buns, which are designed to emulate that of the red spider lily, which is symbolic of death and are laid at grave sites because it is believed that they help guide spirits to the afterlife. This aspect of the flower partly comes from a legend of 2 lovers who fell for each other at first sight, but were cursed to never be together, which is represented by the main part of the flower and its stems, which in part plays into Toga and Deku's relationship, as Toga fell for Deku at first sight, but due to them being from completely different worlds, they could never be together. Though the red spider lily's relation to death somewhat plays with what I believe to be Toga's greatest influence, Yami Kawaii culture, which Yami Kawaii is a countercultural movement that glorifies sickness and mental health due to them being taboo subjects in Japan. The name itself means dark or sickly cute, and it rose to popularity around 2010. Toga plays into these elements quite well, as her fascination with blood being deemed somewhat a mental illness, but her desire to be herself and to be wanted plays very well with the Yami Kawaii mission statement. Along with this, the symbols of Yami Kawaii culture are also seen very prominent in Toga's design, from the cutesy clothing and usage of syringe and box cutters in their logos and jewelry. Toga herself has a villain costume which utilizes deployable syringes that helps her gather blood. Along with this, not only does she use a box cutter often, she is dangerously proficient with knives. And Toga even has one of the most common makeup-like effects under her eyes, with a Yami Kawaii trend being under-eye blush in the Boyajuku style, which emulates a sickly or tired bags under the eye, which Toga likely acquired naturally from her always being on the run from the law. Though if there was one aspect of Yami Kawaii culture that Toga represents perfectly, it's the idea of expressing a taboo feeling or emotion instead of repressing them. Toga's views on love and blood's connection are considered wrong or weird because people don't view blood like Toga does, as she essentially views blood as the ultimate way of getting to know someone, because for Toga, it is. Quite literally it is. And from an early age, she found things that others would find disgusting cute, such as a bloody bruised bird. But instead of addressing the issue there and then, the people in Toga's life brushed it aside, trying to hammer out her flaws and forcing her to wear basically the persona of a normal girl. Her parents placing her into quirk counseling, essentially ignoring her issues and hoping that they would just go away with time. Little did they know that all it was repressing her mindset, causing her to not understand or know how to handle her feelings, so that they all come bursting out during her adolescence. As one afternoon she was watching along with other students as a male student named Saito got into a fist fight. This left him bruised and bloody, and awakened something within Toga. She felt a powerful desire, a romantic crush of sorts, but instead of manifesting in the form of awkward teenage hormones, instead, Toga felt an intense lust for blood, longing to consume Sato's. So much so that after class, during graduation, she assaulted him with a knife in the hallway of the school, stabbing him and then sucking his blood out with a straw. And it's this incident that can somewhat be represented best by Toga's own favorite thing. First, of course, being blood, but along with that is pomegranates, the fruit with a blood-red seed, often used as a symbol of fertility and life. But one of the most famous mythologies involving pomegranates is that of the Queen of the Underworld, Persephone, who was bound to the underworld with Hades after he fed her seeds from a pomegranate, causing the fruit to gain a symbolic meaning of everlasting marriage and a bond between two people. Toga reflects this in her views on drinking blood, as to her, it's as passionate as kissing the ones you love. But in her doing so in such a violent way, Toga forcibly tied herself to the underworld of society for the rest of her life. And this incident went on to make national news, with everyone who claimed to know Toga saying she didn't seem like the kind of person who would do something like this, and her parents even specifically took blame for her actions, but blamed her for turning out the way she did. Essentially, because of the mask they all forced her to wear, no one got to actually know the real Toga and know what she was thinking. Interestingly enough, much like Persephone, in the underworld, Toga was free of her restrictions and expectations, and in this freedom, she would take to the streets and prey on anyone who caught her fancy, but she wasn't stupid about her attacks. Being on the run, Toga learned to take advantage of many things, such as fleeing from the scenes of her crime as soon as she was done, or honing her sensitivity when it comes to reading others' behaviors, and even using her status as a high school girl to overcome and trick the heroes hunting her down. Though things all changed when the hero killer Stain made his debut, and hearing a villain who worked with blood had an organization of villains with like-minded ideas, Toga jumped at the chance of joining them. She wanted to meet people who understood her, and here she would forge bonds with most of the villains there, viewing the group as something that made her happy, and one of the few things that she would go out of her way to do things she actively doesn't want to help everyone in the group. And one person that she specifically grew the closest to was Twice, someone she likely saw a lot of her early self in. A person hiding behind a mask to keep themselves together, but she never forced him to break out of that comfort zone. Instead, she helped him hold himself together when he needed it, and was there for him like no one was for her. And she was as important to him as he was to her. Their struggles helped each other grow as people, and they both realized that the League of Villains was the only place in the world that they truly belonged. And it's this reason why Twice's death affected her the most, as Twice was murdered by a pro-hero simply because he had overcome his personal demons and awakened control over his ability. They viewed this as too dangerous for hero society and had him eliminated, as if he wasn't even human. This ignited rage within Toga, her acting more cold than usual in her murder, fueled by her reinforced views that hero society is one that just suppresses others without considering how they think or feel. A world which is truly broken, one she wouldn't mind seeing crumbling to dust. Because if people are going to live how they please by threatening others, then they should be expected to live up to the consequences of those actions. Himiko Toga is slowly becoming one of my favorite characters in the whole of Hiroaka. Starting first as your typical yandere character, who over time morphed, much like her Quirk, into something much, much more. And her being born with this natural desire, which is considered taboo by most of the people in her country, I find could be an interesting metaphor Horikoshi is using for her bisexuality. As well in Japan, homosexuality and bisexuality isn't exactly forbidden, it is commonly viewed as a choice, especially in adolescence, and some students face harsh bullying because they want to be themselves. And when they approach teachers or guardians with these issues, the common sentiment is to tell the student to simply act normal and suppress this aspect about themselves, in a similar way that Toga was taught. As the common sentiment in Japan is the nail that sticks out tends to get hammered down the hardest. And we see that Toga herself is bisexual, not only in the fact that it's stated that she loves both men and women in her prototype design, but her actions in the series, alongside how she describes love, shows that she has a similar affection for both Uraraka as she does Deku, and it wouldn't be the first example of an LGBT character in Hiroaka, especially one on the side of the League of Villains. Toga is just one that is more blatant and obvious about it. Also, mentioning Uraraka earlier, one really cool aspect of Toga that I definitely want to see explored more in the future of Hiroaka is how she seems to be a villainous foil to Uraraka, so much so that Toga herself views Uraraka as someone that she can communicate with to help understand herself more, since they actually think a lot alike. On top of this, they are both skilled in close-range combat, and both strive to live a comfortable life free from restraint, and they value the option of being open and honest about their emotions with those they care about. Ultimately, Toga has only gotten better with every chapter that she's in, and I really hope to see more of her in every passing arc. And if I were to place some predictions on her future in the series, I assume that it's inevitable that her and Uraraka will clash again, paying off all the buildup that we've had between the two up to this point. Though no matter where she goes in the series, I can say with confidence that she has been quite a glorious character so far, one of the best in all of Hiroaka. And if you enjoyed this video and want to support me and my channel in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MediNotTheBadGuy. And if you want to find love flowing like blood, well, you can do so by buying a copy of Shimonetta, A Boring Road with a Concept of Dirty Jokes Doesn't Exist at buyshimonetta.com.